Now, how is accreditation related to internal quality assurance? And mainly, are they identical? Are they related? And are they maybe even potentially completely different, for example? And also, can you just give like a brief definition what internal quality assurance is for maybe someone who doesn't know what that is?
Sure. So whereas accreditation focuses on whether a program or an institution meets the guidelines and standards set forth by the accreditation board, internal quality improvement is much more nebulous, varied, and covers a much broader range of types of things you're inspecting the quality of. Academic programs are one of them. That's where accreditation and improvement come together most, because especially professional programs, their first and foremost focus is on meeting the needs of the profession, and that's achieved through the accreditation process. Universities have programs that are and are not accredited, so they have to decide to what extent they want to extend that kind of quality assurance, the program review kind, to the other academic programs on their campuses that are not accredited, and to other than academic programs, to administrative support processes, to budgeting and finance, and so on. And as you start getting into these different areas, you can't get into like a single set of standards. You have much more varied sets of goals and objectives that you're trying to assess whether your programs and your processes are meeting their objectives. So while there's a lot in common to this kind of evaluation, they're often fairly qualitative processes because it's all based on what the program or the unit or the person is trying to do when it comes down to personnel evaluation. So a lot is in common, but there are also a lot of things that put the two processes in tension to each other. And that has to do with the fact that accreditation is in the realm of compliance, which means answering to other people's questions. And they represent certain needs that are somewhat common to the university, but also are very focused and narrow, whereas the university has a much broader focus. And often what happens is the kind of information wanted for accreditation is not particularly useful for internal improvement because it's more summative and less formative. It's more a judgment on how the program does overall, rather than what does it do particularly well and what does it need to improve. Those internal improvements use different kinds of evaluation processes, and while they can be compatible, they can often create tensions because external people want just the facts, want to see what's happening. Internal people want to understand more about the intricacies of what's going on and how they can possibly do things differently. So they're in the same spirit, but they often have some conflicting and tension aspects to doing both of them. And sometimes there's a thought that you can use accreditation, and you can to some extent for internal improvement, but it just doesn't go very far. Internal improvement is a much more micro-focused activity that gets into all the processes and all the programs, and makes strategic priorities about what is the most important thing to improve. When you're doing accreditation, it's focused on that program regardless of whether it's important to the university or not. When the university does improvement, it has to make more priority decisions. There are so many things one can attend to in a large organization. What should we attend to? And that is driven by different values and different objectives than the accreditation focus.
Thank you. What are the major elements of a mature internal quality assurance system?
Well, certainly there is a leadership component in which the executives of the organization need to set a tone that values internal improvement and that does not create a culture of blame, but rather a culture of cooperative work. As much of the work we do in higher education is highly collaborative, and it's not like there's any one thing that makes a big difference. Everything makes some difference. So there's a lot of thinking about, how does the leadership guide people to focus their time on energy on what they should focus on improving. Second, there's a technical infrastructure, and that often involves management information systems that are cultivated for the purposes of evaluation, which is different than cultivating systems for operational needs, which is why they exist in the first place. So when you move to incorporating evaluation systematically into the university's processes, you have to create almost a parallel information system. You have the operational information system and you have the analytic information systems. Terms like data warehouses, and you usually see dashboards in this area, and it's much more about how you take information from the operational system and structure it so that it can be useful for monitoring. So for example, you have to take certain snapshots of data at certain times, so whenever you look back at history, you get the same answer to the question. If you use live data, you will not get that. So there are very important considerations for how you structure your information systems to enable evaluation and accreditation, assessment, research, whatever you want to call it.
Given the different elements and approaches that you discussed, how do you recommend that an institution go about reviewing and further developing its internal quality processes?
Well, I think part of that is by looking simultaneously at a couple of features of the process, one being accreditation. That's something that is needed for external legitimacy purposes, for recruiting students to the programs and so on, so that's important. But secondly, you have the way the university operates in terms of monitoring processes, which has a lot to do with the way it's structured. Some places have highly decentralized structures and some more centralized structures. So the way you approach it really depends on the context of the institution. For decentralized structures, you tend to use a lot of ground-up kinds of supports, whereas for more centralized structures, you tend to have more systemic plans and processes and units that will help the process. And obviously, the best thing is to have both, is to enable the ground-up work so that individual faculty and staff are motivated to examine what they are doing, look to ways to continuously improve that, whether that's the teacher in the classroom or the admissions personnel in the office or what have you. And at the same time, you have the kinds of more strategic information that allow the executive levels and the tactical levels of the organization to kind of keep in touch with each other through how that information is integrated from top to bottom.